I want to bring in MS Now's Jake Traylor at the White House. David Drucker is senior writer at The Dispatch, author of the book In Trump's Shadow, and an MS Now contributor. And Nicholas Burns is former U.S. ambassador to China and NATO and a Harvard University professor. It's good to have all of you here. Mr. Ambassador, the president needed a win. The American people absolutely needed a win. Did they get one?
I think it was actually an important summit. You've got to have these high-level channels. Given the top-down nature of the Chinese government, you have to deal with President Xi. So just as President Biden had 3 summits, I think it was a good idea to have this one. There were some specific achievements. Number one, Boeing is promised at least 200 sales of jets, commercial jets, airliners to China. Number two, the long-awaited big Chinese purchase of American agriculture, about $10 billion. Those are significant. But I think there are a lot of other questions that are unanswered. One is Taiwan. Will President Trump now go forward with the arms package for Taiwan that he legally is required to do under the Taiwan Relations Act? He avoided that question and gave reason to doubt he would on his Air Force One interview. And second, will the Chinese actually use their leverage against Iran to argue to the Iranians for a quicker and speedier ceasefire? I have my doubts on those two as well.
And David, on Air Force One, Trump was asked about whether he and President Xi had talked about tariffs, which was obviously a big part of what fueled the economic downturn here more than a year ago. He said, "We didn't discuss it." What are we to make of that?
Well, really hard to tell, because often when Trump discusses things or makes announcements, they turn out to be ephemeral and there's little follow through. Other times, we'll get paper from the White House and there's something concrete. So I think the trouble with these summits, and I think the ambassador is correct, it's important to have them. There's a lot that can be achieved, and just keeping open lines of communication between two superpowers is very, very important, especially given the several points of contention between the U.S. and China. I think, the issue with how Trump handles these summits generally over the course of his now 2 presidencies is that there isn't necessarily a lot of planning and foresight into what the goal is and what the deliverables are going to be. Right? With a lot of these summits over the years, an administration will essentially work out the whole point of it before the president arrives on foreign soil. And then, it's about the meetings and the dog and pony show, and they dot the I and cross the T, and it's done. And we can all, deliberate whether or not, the accomplishment was worthwhile or counterproductive, but there's something there. And I think just with President Trump and his style, it's very hard to tell. The thing I will say about the tariffs with China is that the president initially with China drove a really hard bargain. China responded very aggressively, and the president, while not backing down entirely, hasn't shown a great appetite to really overhaul the U.S.-China trade relationship on a permanent basis, and that in and of itself is interesting.
So, Jake, and obviously the ambassador is right about the president talking about 200 new Boeing jets, although that's significantly less than they've bought from their rivals in Europe. And China, apparently according to the New York Times, after the president left, had no comment about those jets. So is there anything specific that the White House is showing to say this trip has produced something significant?
I mean, Chris, in short, no. The White House is calling this less an art of the deal type of conversations between President Trump and President Xi, more of a relational reset between the two world leaders. Trump says that they talked about everything. He's, and said essentially every question he was asked on Air Force One, the president said it was brought up. The substance, the details, the path forward, that still remains pretty unclear, as folks have already mentioned. The two leaders did not announce any clear resolutions on Taiwan. Trump said that he would soon make a decision about the providing arms to Taiwan on major issues like Iran. The president said that he and Xi talked extensively about that, but that he wasn't going to ask any favors to President Xi to help end the long-going conflict. On tariffs, as you noted, the president said that it didn't even come up as we are in this long-standing trade war with the nation of China. So Trump was very clearly focused on more the relational aspects with President Xi. At one point on Air Force One, when he was gaggling with reporters, he was asked about reporting that President Xi had made some notion that the United States was in decline. President Trump was really quick to defend that. Take a listen.
He said today, and he said it very publicly, he said the U.S. was declining for the last 4 years. And he said what President Trump has done in the last 15, 16 months has been virtually a miracle. He said we have the hottest country anywhere in the world.
As you noted, Chris, President Trump did say that China agreed to buy 200 Boeing airplanes, as well as some oil products, as well as some agriculture commodities as well. But it's just worth laying out the context there that these are long-standing commodities, often traded between the United States and by China, and that China themselves has still not even confirmed those deals quite yet, Chris.
Thank you for that. So, Mr. Ambassador, I am not an expert on political theory, so I'll lean on you for that, if I may. When she invoked, and again, this is what we know publicly and in statements, right? When she invoked that political theory about an emerging power threatening to displace an existing great power, which we know he would love to do. He would love China to be number one, and also the implication of that theory is that it could lead to war. Do you think he was, as President Trump suggested, talking about Joe Biden?
Not a chance. President Xi has brought up the Thucydides trap. It's based on a book written by my Harvard colleague, Graham Allison, in 2015. He's brought it up numerous times with President Biden and with other presidents. So he wasn't talking about President Biden. The Chinese have convinced themselves that the United States, Republicans and Democrats, that we are on a downward path and they're the future. President Xi is fond of saying the East is rising and the West is falling. He's been saying that for a number of years, including during the Trump administration. So I don't think we should make this into a partisan issue. It's not. We've got to coalesce here in the United States, Republicans and Democrats and independents, to make our country stronger and to act in the way we should act to protect our national interests. And I do think that this Taiwan issue is going to be very important. I hope the president will press China to release Jimmy Lai and the other political prisoners that are on the White House list. That's important. I do think there was 2 bits of good news additional to what we've talked about. And these agricultural purchases are extremely important for our farm community. But there is an agreement between the 2 governments. They'll begin discussing artificial intelligence, and particularly the safeguards, the risks associated with the Anthropic Mythos model that would allow cyber terrorists and criminal groups to do tremendous damage to the global economic system. The fact that we're going to talk to China about AI safety and security is a very good thing. And President Trump also gave his support to not try to remove Chinese students from the United States. He said it was important that Chinese students stay. I think that's a very important issue, too. So I think there were some things that were accomplished here. But some big issues, Taiwan and Iran, remain unresolved.
And there's another one, David. I want to play a little of what the president said when he was asked about getting China's help to end the war in Iran. Here it is.
I'm not asking for any favors, because when you ask for favors, you have to do favors in return. We don't need favors. We've wiped out their armed forces, essentially. We may have to do a little cleanup work because we had a little month-long ceasefire, I guess you'd call it.
You know, what Trump there would call a favor, the rest of the world might call a necessity, because the U.S. has not been able to end the war on its own. The Strait of Hormuz is not open. Gas prices are still going up. Is this bravado on Trump's part, David? Is it just smart politics? What do you make of that?
Well, it's pretty standard issue Trump, right? I mean, he doesn't like multilateral alliances. He doesn't like working with other countries. He does so reluctantly. I think it's one of the reasons why he didn't consult with our allies in Europe and the Middle East before launching this war. At least it's particularly not in Europe. And of course, then he wanted help, and they were like, we weren't consulted. I mean, he didn't even consult with the American voter before launching the war. Look, as I've said before, there is immense justification for the Iran war, whether you agree with it or not. There is justification. The president never made a case, not domestically or internationally, but he likes to do one-off deals where he feels like he is the winner. He is not the kind of person that likes to engage in compromise where both sides can tout victory. He likes to be able to say that I got the better end of the deal. And so I think this is just the case where he was speaking plainly about the fact that either he doesn't want to have to owe China a favor, or it's possible there were discussions and the price was too high. That is very possible. It's just not something that he discussed in that clip.
Let me ask you finally, Mr. Ambassador, about your observations of President Xi, because a lot of the articles I read suggested that he seemed to be acting as if he was in a different position than he has in the past, that he seems more confident, that he seems to really believe, and you touched on this, that they hold the cards. But is that a good assessment, or as much as we can know from this vantage point?
You know, I think I haven't seen really a major change between the way he dealt with President Biden or President Trump. He's enormously self-confident. He's very experienced. He's been in power since 2012. And he believes that time is on the side of the authoritarian countries. And of course, we disagree with that and should disagree with it. I will say this. I thought in the beginning of the summit, I understand that President Trump wants to be civil and polite. Of course, he should be when visiting a foreign capital. But the way he went out of his way to say to President Xi, "You're a great leader. I admire you. I admire your country. We're going to have a fantastic relationship." He repeated all this on Truth Social this morning. That's not the way an American president should act. President Xi Jinping is the greatest human rights violator in the world. His country, under his leadership, his government has put forward the most intrusive cyber attack on the United States in the history of the United States. His military is trying to outpoint our military in the Indo-Pacific. He's not a friend of the United States. He's not a great leader in the positive sense of that word. And I thought it made President Trump look like a supplicant. You know, we should have more self-confidence. Our system is the better and superior system to the communist system. So I think it's more of a reflection of how maybe we're handling ourselves than how President Xi is handling himself.